The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel shimmered with crystal chandeliers and white roses, each petal perfectly placed by the most expensive wedding planner in Manhattan. Harrison Cole stood at the altar in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his jaw set in a hard line as he watched 300 guests settle into their seats. At 34, he had built an empire in commercial real estate that stretched across 5 continents, but today he felt like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by forces beyond his control. This wedding was a business transaction, nothing more. His father, Richard Cole, had made that abundantly clear 6 months ago when the doctors delivered their devastating diagnosis. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less. The old man's dying wish wasn't for reconciliation or heartfelt conversations. It was for Harrison to marry Josephine Hartwell, the daughter of Thomas Hartwell, whose family owned the largest construction company on the East Coast. The marriage would merge 2 dynasties and secure the Cole legacy for generations. Harrison had never even met his bride. He knew the basics, of course. Josephine Hartwell, 28 years old, educated at prestigious schools overseas, rarely photographed, almost ghost-like in her absence from social media and society pages. Thomas Hartwell kept his daughter away from the spotlight, and Harrison had respected that privacy by not investigating further. What was the point? This marriage was about business, about honoring his father's final request, about duty. Love had nothing to do with it. His best friend and best man, Derek Morrison, leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to go through with this, Harry. Your father would understand." Harrison's blue eyes remained fixed on the ornate doors at the back of the ballroom. "He's dying, Derek. This is all he's asked of me. He's asked you to give up your life." "I gave up having a life the day I took over Cole Enterprises at 23, Harrison replied quietly. "This is just another merger." The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's canon, and the guests rose to their feet. Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs, though his expression remained impassive. He had trained himself over years of high-stakes negotiations never to show emotion, never to reveal weakness. But as those doors opened and the bride appeared, something inside him shifted. She wore a traditional wedding gown with a long veil that completely obscured her face, a cascade of ivory silk and delicate lace that flowed behind her like a river. Her father, Thomas Hartwell, a silver-haired man with sharp features and calculating eyes, held her arm as they began the slow walk down the aisle. Harrison noticed that the bride's steps were measured, almost reluctant, and her bouquet of white peonies trembled slightly in her hands. She was as trapped as he was. The thought brought him an unexpected sense of kinship. They were both sacrificial lambs on the altar of family obligation and business legacy. Perhaps they could find some mutual understanding in their shared imprisonment. Perhaps this arranged marriage didn't have to be completely miserable. As Josephine and her father reached the altar, Harrison studied what little he could see of his bride. She was petite, several inches shorter than his 6'2" frame, even in heels. Her dress was elegant but modest, with long sleeves and a high neckline that suggested either personal preference or her father's conservative influence. Through the veil, he could make out only the vaguest outline of her features. The officiant, a round-faced minister with kind eyes, began the ceremony with traditional words about love and commitment that felt almost mocking given the circumstances. Harrison barely heard them. His attention was caught by a detail he hadn't noticed before: the bride's hands. Even gripping the bouquet, they showed signs of work. Not the soft, manicured hands of someone who had never known a day of labor, but hands that had held tools, created things, lived a life beyond ballrooms and board meetings. Who was Josephine Hartwell? The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. They recited vows that Harrison knew neither of them believed. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, Harrison half expected someone to speak up, to save them both from this charade. But the ballroom remained silent, except for the shuffling of expensive shoes on marble floors. "You may now kiss the bride," the minister announced. This was the moment Harrison had been dreading. Kissing a stranger in front of 300 people felt invasive, wrong. But Thomas Hartwell was watching with hawk-like intensity, and Harrison's own father sat in the front row, looking frail and grey in his wheelchair, his eyes pleading with his son to see this through. Harrison reached for the veil with steady hands, his mind already compartmentalizing this moment as just another uncomfortable business dinner, another necessary discomfort in the pursuit of larger goals. He lifted the delicate fabric slowly, revealing first a pointed chin, then full lips painted a soft pink, then a straight nose, and finally, His hands froze. Time seemed to stop, as Harrison stared at the face before him, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. His chest constricted, and for the first time in over a decade, Harrison Cole felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The woman standing before him, the woman he had just married, the woman who was supposed to be Josephine Hartwell, was someone he knew, someone he had known intimately, someone he had loved with every fiber of his being 10 years ago, before she disappeared from his life without explanation, without goodbye, without a trace. Rachel. The name escaped his lips in a whisper so quiet that only she could hear it. Her brown eyes met his, and in them he saw a flash of pain, recognition, and something else. Fear. Not Josephine Hartwell. Rachel Morgan. The art student he had fallen desperately in love with when he was 24 and trying to prove he was more than just Richard Cole's heir. The woman who had made him laugh, who had challenged him, who had seen past his money and his name to the person underneath. The woman who had vanished without warning, leaving only a brief note saying she had to go, that their worlds were too different, that he should forget her. He had never forgotten her, and now she was his wife. The guests were growing restless, waiting for the kiss that would seal their union. Harrison's mind raced through impossible calculations. Why was Rachel pretending to be Josephine Hartwell? Where was the real Josephine? Did Thomas Hartwell know about the deception? How had Rachel ended up in a wedding dress, about to marry him in what was supposed to be an arranged business merger? Her eyes pleaded with him silently. Not here. Not now. Please. Harrison made a decision in a split second, relying on instincts honed through years of navigating corporate treachery. He would play along for now, but he would get answers. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was supposed to be brief and chaste, but ignited something he thought had died years ago. The ballroom erupted in applause, but Harrison barely heard it. All he could feel was the tremble in Rachel's lips, the ghost of a memory, and the certainty that nothing about this day or his life would ever be the same. The reception passed in a blur of champagne toasts, forced smiles, and the suffocating weight of unanswered questions. Harrison moved through the motions with the practiced ease of someone who had attended hundreds of corporate events, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, playing the role of the satisfied groom. But his eyes never strayed far from Rachel, or whoever she was supposed to be now. She played her part flawlessly. As Josephine Hartwell, she smiled demurely, spoke softly when addressed, and kept her hand resting lightly on Harrison's arm whenever Thomas Hartwell was nearby. But Harrison noticed the small tells that others missed, the way her fingers tightened on her champagne flute when someone mentioned the Hartwell family history, the brief moment of panic when an older woman asked about her boarding school days in Switzerland, the careful, almost scripted responses that suggested she had memorized a life that wasn't hers. During their first dance, Harrison finally had the chance to speak to her privately, though they were surrounded by 300 watching eyes. "We need to talk," he murmured, as he guided her across the floor to a waltz he had learned specifically for this occasion. "Not here," Rachel whispered back, her body tense in his arms. "Harrison, please. I can explain everything, but not here. You disappeared for 10 years. 10 years, Rachel. And now you show up as someone else's daughter, marrying me in an arranged business deal. I think I deserve some immediate answers." Her brown eyes filled with tears that she blinked away rapidly. Up close, he could see the changes that time had wrought. She was thinner than he remembered, with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. There was a wariness about her that hadn't existed in the carefree art student he had fallen in love with. Whatever had happened in the past decade had left its mark. "The real Josephine is safe," Rachel said quietly, her lips barely moving. "That's all I can tell you right now. Please, Harrison, trust me for just a few more hours. Once we're alone, I'll tell you everything. Trust you." Harrison's voice was low but sharp. "You left me without a word. You broke my heart and vanished like smoke. Why should I trust you now? Because I never stopped loving you," she whispered, and the raw honesty in her voice made his breath catch. Not for a single day. Before Harrison could respond, the song ended, and Thomas Hartwell appeared at his elbow, his smile not reaching his cold grey eyes. "Time for the father-daughter dance," Thomas announced, extending his hand to Rachel. "If you'll excuse us, Harrison." Harrison watched as Rachel was swept away, noting how her entire demeanor changed around Thomas. She became smaller somehow, more subservient, her eyes downcast. Thomas held her too tightly as they danced, and Harrison saw him lean down to whisper something in her ear that made her face go pale. Derek materialized beside Harrison with 2 glasses of scotch. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Harrison muttered, accepting the drink and downing it in one burning gulp. "What do you know about Josephine Hartwell?" Derek raised an eyebrow. "Your wife, not much. Thomas keeps her locked away like Rapunzel in a tower. Rumor has it she's been sick, or maybe he's just controlling." "Why?" "Just curious about the woman I married." "Little late for due diligence, don't you think?" Derek studied him carefully. "What's going on, Harry? You've been acting strange since you lifted that veil." Harrison couldn't tell Derek the truth, not yet. Not when he didn't understand it himself. Just the reality of what I've done setting in. The reception continued with the cutting of an elaborate 5-tier cake, more toasts from people Harrison barely knew, and the throwing of the bouquet, which Rachel performed with mechanical precision. Through it all, Harrison's mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. If Rachel was impersonating Josephine, where was the real woman? Had something happened to her? Was this some elaborate con? Or was Rachel being forced into this deception? And what role did Thomas Hartwell play? The man watched Rachel like a hawk tracking a mouse, his presence both protective and threatening. As evening descended and guests began to depart, Harrison's father requested a private moment. Richard Cole looked even more fragile in his wheelchair, his once powerful frame reduced to skin and bones, but his mind remained sharp. "You did well today, son," Richard said, his voice raspy. "The merger will secure everything we've built. The Hartwell construction contracts will guarantee Cole Enterprises' dominance for the next 50 years. "Dad, I need to ask you something." Harrison knelt beside the wheelchair. "How much do you know about Josephine Hartwell?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "What kind of question is that?" "Thomas vouched for her character. She's educated, refined, from good family. What more do you need to know? Have you ever actually met her before today?" "No, but Thomas showed me photographs, academic records, references from her schools abroad. Everything was in order." Richard gripped Harrison's hand with surprising strength. "Why are you asking? Is something wrong?" Harrison looked into his father's dying eyes and made a choice. His father had weeks, maybe days left. Adding stress and worry would only hasten the end. Whatever was happening with Rachel and the Hartwells, Harrison would handle it himself. "Nothing's wrong," Harrison lied. "Just trying to get to know my wife." "Good. She seems like a lovely girl, quiet, obedient, well-bred. She'll give you strong heirs to carry on the Cole name." Richard's grip loosened, and exhaustion washed over his features. "I can die in peace now, knowing you're settled." Guilt twisted in Harrison's gut. His father thought he had secured his son's future, had no idea that the entire marriage might be built on deception. The final torture of the evening was the departure ceremony. Harrison and Rachel were expected to leave together for the honeymoon suite at the hotel, while guests threw rice and cheered. Thomas Hartwell pulled Rachel aside one last time before she got into the waiting limousine, and Harrison watched the exchange with growing unease. Whatever Thomas said made Rachel's face drain of color, and she nodded rapidly, like a prisoner agreeing to terms. Finally, they were alone in the back of the limousine, separated from the driver by a privacy screen. The moment the car pulled away from the hotel, Rachel collapsed against the leather seat, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for not exposing me in front of everyone." Harrison turned to face her fully, his emotions a volatile mix of anger, confusion, and a love he had tried for years to bury. "Start talking, Rachel, and don't leave anything out." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with a devastating sadness. "My real name is Rachel Morgan, just like you remember. But for the past 3 years, I've been living as Josephine Hartwell, and if Thomas finds out that you know the truth, he'll kill the real Josephine. And probably me, too." The limousine glided through Manhattan's glittering streets as Rachel began to tell a story that would shatter everything Harrison thought he knew about the Hartwell family, about the business merger his father had orchestrated, and about the woman he had never stopped loving. Rachel's hands trembled as she reached up to remove the elaborate pins holding her veil in place. Her dark hair tumbled free, and Harrison was struck by how much she still looked like the woman he had loved, yet how different she seemed. Haunted, careful, like someone who had learned to expect danger around every corner. 3 years ago, I was working at a small art gallery in Brooklyn, Rachel began, her voice barely above a whisper. I was finally building a career, teaching painting classes to kids on weekends, trying to make something of myself. One night a woman came into the gallery just before closing. She was terrified, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, begging for help. Harrison listened intently, his analytical mind already piecing together implications. Her name was Josephine Hartwell. She told me she had escaped from her father's estate in Connecticut, that he had been holding her prisoner there for years. At first I didn't believe her. It seemed impossible that someone from such a prominent family could be imprisoned in plain sight. But then she showed me the scars. Rachel's voice cracked, cigarette burns on her arms, marks from being restrained, years of abuse hidden behind the Hartwell family's perfect reputation. Harrison's jaw clenched. He had done business with Thomas Hartwell, had shaken the man's hand hours ago. The thought made his skin crawl. Josephine explained that her mother had died when she was 12, and Thomas had slowly isolated her from the world. He homeschooled her, controlled every aspect of her life, and used her as a pawn in his business dealings. When she turned 18, he began arranging marriages to wealthy men. Marriages that never happened because Josephine would have panic attacks or try to run away. Thomas would tell everyone she was sick, unstable, and tighten his control even more. The limousine turned onto Fifth Avenue, passing store windows decorated with late spring flowers. The normalcy of the city outside contrasted sharply with the darkness Rachel was revealing. I hid her in my apartment that night, Rachel continued. We called the police, but when they went to the Hartwell estate, Thomas had documentation from 3 different psychiatrists saying Josephine suffered from severe delusions and paranoid schizophrenia. He had medical records, prescriptions, years of paper trails proving his daughter was mentally ill. The police treated her like a runaway mental patient and wanted to return her to his custody. "So you ran," Harrison said, understanding beginning to dawn. "We both ran. I had some money saved, and Josephine had managed to grab some jewelry she could sell. We made it to a women's shelter in Philadelphia, then moved to a safe house in Baltimore. For 6 months we lived like fugitives while Josephine tried to build a case against her father. But Thomas Hartwell has connections everywhere. Judges, lawyers, police chiefs. Every time we thought we were safe, he'd find us." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Then Josephine got sick, really sick. She started having seizures, severe headaches. We took her to a free clinic, and they found a brain tumor. The doctor said it was operable, but the surgery would cost nearly $200,000. We had nothing. We were living in a basement apartment, working under fake names at restaurants and cleaning houses." Harrison reached for her hand without thinking, and she gripped it like a lifeline. "I sold everything I owned, but it wasn't enough. Josephine was dying, and I was desperate. That's when Thomas found us." Rachel's voice hardened. "He showed up at our apartment with an offer. He would pay for Josephine's surgery and ongoing medical care, set her up in a private facility where she could recover in peace, give her a trust fund, so she'd never have to depend on him again. All she had to do was let me take her place." "Why?" Harrison asked, though he was beginning to understand the twisted logic. "Because you," Rachel said, looking at him directly. "Your father had approached Thomas about a marriage between you and Josephine. The business merger was worth billions to both families. Thomas couldn't admit his daughter had run away, or that he'd been abusing her. It would destroy his reputation and the deal. So he needed someone who could pass as Josephine, at least long enough to get through the wedding. And you agreed to this? Josephine was dying, Harrison. The tumor was growing. She had maybe 2 months without surgery. What was I supposed to do? Let her die to protect myself?" Rachel's voice rose with emotion. "I loved her like a sister. She was the only real friend I'd had since—" She stopped herself, but Harrison knew what she had been about to say. "Since him." "Thomas's deal included one more condition," Rachel continued bitterly. "I could never tell anyone the truth, especially not you. He has men watching Josephine every day at the medical facility. If I deviate from his script, if I try to expose him, if I tell you who I really am, he'll withdraw her medical care and make sure she disappears permanently. He has the doctors, the staff, everyone on his payroll. Josephine is still his prisoner, just in a different cage." The limousine pulled up to the Meridian Hotel, and Harrison realized they had been driving in circles while Rachel told her story. The driver's voice came through the intercom, asking if they were ready to go to the honeymoon suite. "Give us a few more minutes," Harrison instructed, then turned back to Rachel. "Why didn't you contact me when you first ran? Why didn't you come to me for help 3 years ago?" Rachel looked away, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because 10 years ago when I left you, it wasn't because our worlds were too different or because I didn't love you. It was because your father paid me to leave. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. What? Richard came to my apartment one night while you were traveling for business. He told me that I was a distraction, that I was holding you back from your potential, that you had a destiny to fulfill and I was just a phase. He offered me $50,000 to disappear from your life and never contact you again. Rachel's voice was hollow. I was 23 years old, Harrison. My parents had just died in a car accident. I had student loans, no job prospects, no family. That money paid for their funeral, paid off my debts, gave me a chance to start over. So I took it and I left, and I hated myself for it every single day. Harrison felt his world tilting again, the foundation of everything he believed about his father cracking. Richard Cole, who had always preached about honor and integrity, had paid off the woman his son loved. I couldn't come to you 3 years ago because I knew you'd never forgive me for taking that money, Rachel said. And I was right to stay away, because look what happened anyway. Your father arranged another marriage for you, another business deal. You were always going to end up here, Harrison, with or without me. That's not true, Harrison said fiercely, but doubt gnawed at him. How much of his life had been orchestrated by his father? How many choices had never really been his? A sharp knock on the limousine window made them both jump. Thomas Hartwell stood outside, his smile pleasant, but his eyes cold as ice. Harrison lowered the window. Everything all right in there? Thomas asked smoothly. Guests are starting to wonder where the happy couple disappeared to. We're fine, Harrison replied, matching Thomas's false pleasantness. Just taking a moment to ourselves. Of course, young love. Thomas's gaze fixed on Rachel with unmistakable threat. Josephine, dear, don't forget what we discussed. Your health depends on following the plan exactly. It wasn't subtle. It was a reminder, a warning, a promise of consequences. Rachel nodded meekly, and Harrison felt rage building in his chest. This man had held a woman prisoner, had manipulated his dying father, and now held Rachel and the real Josephine's lives in his hands. We'll be right up, Harrison said, raising the window before he did something foolish. Thomas walked away, and Harrison turned to Rachel with new determination burning in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to go up to that suite and pretend everything is normal because Thomas undoubtedly has people watching. Tomorrow, we'll play the happy newlyweds at the farewell breakfast. But then I'm going to fix this, Rachel. I'm going to get Josephine somewhere safe, and I'm going to make sure Thomas Hartwell pays for everything he's done. You can't, Rachel protested. He's too powerful. He has too many connections. If you try to fight him, he'll destroy you and kill Josephine. I'm Harrison Cole, he said quietly, with the confidence of a man who had built an empire through sheer will and intelligence. I've toppled corporate giants and outmaneuvered some of the most ruthless businessmen in the world. Thomas Hartwell may have connections, but I have resources he can't imagine, and now I have something else. Motivation. He pulled Rachel close, cupping her face in his hands. I lost you once, because I was too blind to see what my father was doing. I'm not losing you again, and I'm not letting an innocent woman stay prisoner to that monster. Rachel searched his eyes, and for the first time since the veil had lifted, Harrison saw hope flicker in her expression. You really think we can beat him? I know we can, but I need you to trust me, and I need to know everything. Every detail about where Josephine is, who's guarding her, what leverage Thomas has, everything. Okay, Rachel whispered. Okay. They exited the limousine and walked into the hotel lobby hand in hand, playing their roles as newlyweds for the watching staff and lingering wedding guests. But as they rode the elevator to the honeymoon suite, Harrison's mind was already working through strategies, calculating moves and counter-moves. Thomas Hartwell had made one critical mistake. He had forced Harrison Cole to marry the woman he had never stopped loving, and in doing so, he had given Harrison the most powerful motivation in the world, protecting someone he would die for. The game was just beginning, and this time, Harrison intended to win. The honeymoon suite was obscenely luxurious, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a marble bathroom larger than most apartments, and a king-sized bed covered in rose petals that seemed to mock the reality of their situation. Rachel stood by the window, still in her wedding dress, looking small and lost against the glittering Manhattan skyline. Harrison loosened his bow tie and pulled out his phone. First things first, we need to assume Thomas has this room bugged. Can you write down the name and address of the facility where Josephine is being held? Rachel nodded and found hotel stationery, scribbling quickly. Harrison photographed the information and immediately sent it to Derek with a coded message they had developed years ago for sensitive business matters. Within minutes, Derek called back. "I'm putting you on speaker," Harrison said, then mouthed to Rachel. "He's trustworthy." "Harry, what's going on?" Derek's voice was sharp with concern. "You're asking me to investigate a private medical facility at 11 o'clock on your wedding night. I need everything you can find on Greenwood Recovery Center in Westchester. Who owns it? Who works there? Financial records, patient lists if you can access them. And I need it quietly. No official channels, no paper trails." There was a pause. "This is about your wife, isn't it? About Josephine Hartwell?" "Yes. But Derek, you need to trust me on this. Don't contact anyone else. Don't go through normal investigative channels. Thomas Hartwell has eyes everywhere." "I'll have preliminary information by morning," Derek promised. "Harry, be careful. Whatever you're involved in sounds dangerous." After hanging up, Harrison turned to Rachel. "Tell me everything about the facility. Guard rotations, which doctors can be trusted, how often Thomas visits." They spent the next 2 hours going over every detail. Rachel had been allowed to visit Josephine twice under heavy supervision, enough to understand the basic layout and routines. The facility was small, exclusive, with only 12 patients and a staff of 20. Thomas had installed his own security team alongside the regular medical staff. Josephine's surgery was successful, Rachel explained, sitting cross-legged on the floor with papers spread around her, looking more like the art student Harrison remembered. "She's been in recovery for 8 weeks now. The tumor is gone, but the doctors say she needs at least another month of monitored care before she's strong enough to leave." "And Thomas is paying for all of it?" "Every penny. It's costing him about $30,000 a week." Rachel's expression darkened. "He visits her every Sunday, supposedly as a caring father, but really, he's reminding her that he controls her life, that if I don't play my part perfectly, she'll suffer." Harrison paced the suite, his mind working through possibilities. The wedding was yesterday, today, technically. Tomorrow is the farewell breakfast with both families. Then we're supposed to leave for a 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives. "Thomas insisted on the Maldives," Rachel said. "He wanted me far away where I couldn't cause problems, which means he's planning something during those 2 weeks. Probably solidifying the business merger, transferring assets, making moves while I'm conveniently absent." Harrison stopped pacing. "We're not going to the Maldives, but Thomas will know something's wrong. Let him. By the time he realizes we've changed plans, it'll be too late." Harrison knelt beside Rachel, taking her hands. "I'm going to be honest with you about something. My father is dying. He has maybe 2 weeks left. This entire arranged marriage was his dying wish, a way to secure the Cole legacy through a merger with Hartwell Construction." Rachel's eyes filled with sympathy. "Harrison, I'm so sorry. I know how complicated your relationship with him is." "He paid you to leave me," Harrison said bluntly. "I'm trying to reconcile the father I knew with the man who would do that. But right now, what matters is that he cannot know about any of this. The stress would kill him immediately, and despite everything, I don't want his last days filled with that burden. So we protect him while we take down Thomas." "Exactly." By 3 in the morning, they had the outline of a plan. It was risky, required perfect timing, and depended on variables they couldn't completely control, but it was their only chance. The farewell breakfast the next morning was an exercise in performance art. Harrison and Rachel played their roles flawlessly, the content newlyweds, grateful for their family's support, excited about their future together. Richard Cole looked happier than Harrison had seen him in months, believing his son was settled and secure. Thomas Hartwell watched everything with calculating eyes, but seemed satisfied that his scheme remained intact. "We're actually going to postpone the Maldives trip," Harrison announced casually over coffee. "Rachel mentioned she's always wanted to see the vineyards in Napa Valley, and I thought we'd make that our honeymoon instead. More romantic, less travel fatigue." Thomas's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "But the arrangements are all made. And I'll compensate the hotels for the cancellation. Don't worry, Thomas. We'll still be unreachable newlyweds, just in California instead of the Indian Ocean." Harrison smiled pleasantly, but his eyes held a challenge. Thomas recovered quickly. "Of course. Whatever makes Josephine happy." The name, her fake name, made Rachel flinch almost imperceptibly. Only Harrison noticed. After breakfast, as families departed and final goodbyes were exchanged, Derek pulled Harrison aside in the hotel corridor. "I have the information you requested," Derek said quietly, handing over a sealed envelope. Harry, this is worse than you thought. Greenwood Recovery Center is owned by a shell corporation that traces back to Thomas Hartwell. He doesn't just have influence there, he owns the entire facility. It's not even a legitimate medical center. Only 3 of the 12 supposed patients are real, and they're all people Thomas has leverage over. Harrison's blood ran cold. What about the doctors? 2 are legitimate, but they believe they're treating mentally ill patients. The rest are on Hartwell's payroll, including the head of security, a former mercenary named Anton Volkov, who has a very disturbing background. Send me everything you have. And Derek? Thank you, I know this is asking a lot. Derek gripped Harrison's shoulder. You're my best friend. Whatever you're doing, I'm with you. Just tell me how to help. Within 24 hours, Harrison had assembled a team. Not investigators or lawyers. Those could be bought or intimidated by someone like Thomas Hartwell. Instead, he contacted people who operated outside traditional channels, a cybersecurity expert who had once helped Cole Enterprises recover from a ransomware attack, a former federal prosecutor who had left government service after becoming disillusioned with corruption, a private security firm that specialized in extracting people from dangerous situations. We move on Sunday, Harrison told Rachel as they sat in his private office at Cole Enterprises headquarters. They had skipped the vineyard trip, using the time instead to plan. Thomas will be at Greenwood for his weekly visit with Josephine. That's when we extract her. He'll have security with him, Rachel protested. I'm counting on it. While Thomas is focused on Josephine and maintaining his cover as a concerned father, my team will be documenting everything. The fake medical records, the imprisoned patients, the unlicensed staff, Volkov's presence. We'll have enough evidence to bury him, and if something goes wrong, Harrison pulled her close, then we adapt. But Rachel, I promise you, Josephine will be free by Sunday night, and Thomas Hartwell will never threaten either of you again. Sunday arrived with crystalline clarity. Harrison watched from a surveillance van parked 2 blocks from Greenwood Recovery Center as his team moved into position. Rachel sat beside him, her hand gripping his so tightly he lost circulation, but he didn't complain. Thomas just entered the building, one of the security team reported through the earpiece. 2 bodyguards with him, plus Volkov at the front desk. Cybersecurity team, you're up, Harrison commanded. The facility's security systems went down exactly as planned, replaced with looped footage that would hide what happened next. Harrison's extraction team, dressed as fire inspectors, entered through a side door that the cybersecurity expert had remotely unlocked. We've got eyes on the target, came the whisper through Harrison's earpiece. Female, late 20s, matches the description. She's in room 207. Is she alone? Negative. Thomas Hartwell is with her now. Wait, something's happening. Harrison's heart pounded as silence filled the earpiece. Then a new voice came through, female, weak but determined. Is this Harrison Cole? Rachel told me you might come. Please hurry. He knows something is wrong. He's making phone calls. Josephine. The real Josephine had managed to get one of the team members' communication devices. We're coming to get you right now, Harrison said. Stay calm. What happened next unfolded with chaotic precision. Thomas realized the security systems were compromised and tried to evacuate with Josephine, but Harrison's team blocked the exits. The former federal prosecutor, armed with emergency court orders obtained through a sympathetic judge, arrived with actual police officers, ones vetted to ensure they weren't on Thomas's payroll. When Thomas was confronted with his fake medical facility, his imprisoned daughter, and the documented evidence of years of abuse, his carefully constructed empire began to crumble. He threatened, blustered, tried to call in favors, but Harrison had anticipated every move. You made one critical mistake, Harrison told Thomas as police officers led him away in handcuffs. You assumed I would be like you, willing to sacrifice anything for business. But I'm not my father, and I'm not you. Some things matter more than mergers and money. The real Josephine Hartwell was transported to a legitimate hospital, where doctors confirmed she was recovering well from her surgery. Rachel stayed by her side, and watching them together, 2 women who had survived so much, Harrison felt something shift in his understanding of what mattered in life. His father died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep, never knowing the truth about the Hartwells. At the funeral, Harrison gave a eulogy that was honest about his father's complexity. A man who had built an empire, but had also made devastating choices in pursuit of legacy. Harrison chose to remember the good while acknowledging the harm, finding peace in the nuance of their complicated relationship. 6 months later, Harrison stood in a small art gallery in Brooklyn, Rachel's gallery, which he had helped her reopen. The walls displayed her paintings, vibrant expressions of trauma transformed into beauty. Josephine, healthy and strong now, worked as the gallery manager, finally living the independent life she had always dreamed of. "Ready?" Rachel asked, appearing beside him in a simple white dress. They were getting married again, not because of business or obligation, but because they chose it. This time, there were only 20 guests. Close friends, Derek, Josephine, and a few family members who mattered. No orchestra, no 5-tier cake, no performance for society. Just truth and love, and the promise of a future built on choice rather than duty. As Harrison slipped a simple gold band onto Rachel's finger, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. Betrayal and reunion, danger and rescue, loss and redemption. They had both been prisoners in their own ways, trapped by circumstances and other people's expectations, but now they were free. "I love you," Rachel whispered, as they sealed their vows with a kiss. "I love you too," Harrison replied. "Always have. Always will." Outside the gallery, Manhattan continued its perpetual motion, millions of people living their separate lives. But inside, in that small space filled with art and light and the people who mattered most, Harrison Cole finally understood what his father never had, that the greatest legacy wasn't measured in dollars or business empires. It was measured in the courage to choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and the strength to build a life that honored both duty and heart. Thomas Hartwell was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, fraud, and abuse. His business empire was dismantled, with assets distributed to his victims. The shell corporation that had funded his crimes was exposed, leading to widespread reforms in private medical facilities. Harrison restructured Cole Enterprises, stepping back from the relentless expansion his father had demanded and instead focusing on ethical business practices and work-life balance. He discovered that success measured by happiness rather than profit margins was far more satisfying. And Rachel, who had once been paid to disappear from Harrison's life, became the center of it, his partner, his conscience, his reminder that some gambles are worth taking, some fights are worth fighting, and some loves are worth waiting 10 years to reclaim. Their story didn't end with a wedding. It began there, with two people who had been broken by circumstances beyond their control, finding the courage to build something new together, something real, something that couldn't be bought, sold, or arranged by anyone but themselves. And that, Harrison reflected as he watched Rachel laugh with Josephine while discussing plans for the gallery's next exhibition, was the greatest triumph of all.